Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about interfacing with our API using the Vuex store. Now a couple of things before we dive in. What I want to do is tell you if you are using Writer and if you are seeing a little bit sluggishness, what you can do is you can right click on node modules and you can go to tools, and here you should have the option to stop indexing. I have started indexing because I already have it disabled, and what will happen is it will stop indexing these folders, so they will not be reachable through this menu here, okay, when you're trying to do file discovery. And also, as you can see, there is going to be a display of current actions that I'm performing. So if you want to know the keybind for what I'm doing, for example, if I open the terminal, you can see the first one says Alt F12, that's the writer key map, and Alt 2 is the one that's for me, okay? So if there is an override, it will appear on the right. If there is no override, that's the default for the key map, right? So I'm going to be using the writer key map as the default that you can orientate on, okay? So, but nevertheless, we want to be interfacing with the API. So first of all, let's go ahead and create a model. Since this is a tricking library, the simplest thing that I can think of is a video submission, right? So in social networks, there is a concept of UGC, user generated content. We're not going to be specifically following the dynamic model that those objects do. We are going to have a little bit more static, and we'll slowly build it up. So let's go ahead and create a directory with models, and in there I want to create a class, and I'll just call it Trick. Okay, so the Trick will represent a video submission essentially with the name and all the other metadata about it, and it will be separate from the voting process. But at the moment it is just a simple model just to give us an example of what we want to do with it, right? So you can either click add here, or remember, don't ask again. Basically it's essentially just, do you want to add it to the head essentially? So if you remember the three parts I get, it's adding it to the head, still need to commit it. So I usually press cancel here. So let's go ahead and do something simple. We'll give it an ID, and we'll also say string name. Okay, so we have the Trick. Now I don't want to get entity framework involved just yet, so what I will do is I will just create another class, and I will create a simple let's say tricky store. Yeah, I think that will be good, right? So tricky store will be a singleton, so CTOR to generate the tricky store. Let's go ahead and say Trix, a new list of trick. We can import all this stuff, Alt Enter, and Alt Enter again, create field Trix. Cool. So now what I want to do is I want to just go ahead and say, right, give me a list of tricks that I can get. So let's say just all, which will be, what's it called? The tricks, right? And then we want to be able to add tricks to it. So there's going to be a little bit of an ID management here. Let's do a void and let's say add. We'll have a trick, and then tricks. First of all, let's go ahead and append the ID a little bit. So ID equals tricks.count +1, and then we will add the trick, right? So we're essentially just simulating a database, and you can see one way that I can traverse between these functions is whatever's highlighted next. For me, it's Alt page up and down. If I wanted to have an error, if I have, for example, an error in here somewhere, right, and I'm in a different file, if I want to jump to that, it's Alt Shift down and up for me, right? So it's jumping to the next error. So again, if I'm here and I have an error in a different file, so I don't have to mess about with finding what file it is, etc., just show me the next error. Okay, so whatever, put the semicolon here, Control Tab to go back. Everything looks fine here. One thing, Alt up. Let's go ahead and make this field read only. Let's go ahead, Control Shift N to startup, right? Open this. So we're in the startup. Let's go ahead and register this service as a singleton so we can register surface it in our actions, right? So services, add singleton, and let's say tricky store, right? So let's go ahead and grab the name for this. We will go into the controllers and we will say Trix. Okay, and again we will inherit from controller base. We will call this an API controller. We will give this a route, and we will say API/Trix. Okay, so this is the part where I'll actually explain the conventions. Okay, so Trix is an entity, all right, or we will treat it as an entity or a database entity, right? So there can be Trix, videos, and users, all right. So the simple Crud operations that can be performed on the Trix endpoint, we'll say, let's go ahead and just first get our store in here. And again, Alt Enter to generate the fields. And we'll do public I action result, that will be alright. Index, or rather, let's say get, and we'll say all. Well, let's just say all together. Yeah, right. And we'll do this as a lambda because it's not really needed. And let's wrap this in an OK, so it's happy. I mean, we can do IEnumerable of Trix, which is fine as well, but this is what we will do. Okay, and we will mark this with an HTTP GET. So this will reside at API /Trix. So let's say /API /Trix. Okay. Next thing that we can do is we will say ID. Okay. And here we will say ID, and this is where we will say that we want to get. And we can provide an ID, and this is where we filter. Okay, and you can do stuff like obviously return no content, stuff like that, 404s, other different errors. But yeah, generally just grab me something with a particular ID and actually make sure that we are comparing the IDs. Okay, so you can see that from these two actions specifically, first we will list all Trix, and then if we want to zoom in on a specific trick, we then append an ID. Now let's say a trick will have a bunch of submissions, right? So if we want to do a backflip, right, we want multiple users to submit videos for that trick. Okay, so at this point what you could do is, if I will just copy this, you can say submissions, right? And here again you can do submissions. This is not something that we're actually going to implement, but just so you can get an idea of the convention that's going to be happening. We have all tricks. We're going to zoom in on a trick, and then on that trick we might want to get all the submissions for that trick, or we might want to get the specific user record for that trick, or like who initially submitted it or something like that. And then maybe you already want to sub ID, but at that point we can have a separate controller for submissions themselves. Okay, so usually you don't want to go too crazy on the routing. Just make sure that you can reach the relationships of the objects through the routing convention without really having to involve a separate controller. So if you don't need a separate controller for these objects, if they only exist in the context of the trick themselves, then it's okay to include them here. Otherwise, give them a separate controller. Okay, usually if you're having to do like multiple IDs here, unless the situations will vary obviously, but this is pretty much where you want to stop. Okay, you'll probably most likely see something like this where the type will be part of the route. Okay, this is a little bit more acceptable. But like if you have the ID, and obviously type can be as part of the query as well, so you just have to be aware of what you're doing here, right? But without rambling on for too much, I will comment this out and I'll leave this in here for now, but as just a reference, but we will remove that. Next thing what you will get is you will have an HTTP post, and let's just copy this, and this is for updating. Or no, sorry, create. So post is for creates, and here is what we're gonna, yeah, let's just accept a trick. Okay, so we're gonna have a trick. We say from body because we're accepting, we're gonna be sending JSON in the body of the request, and then that's where it's gonna read it from. We don't really need to return too much. Let's just go ahead, grab the store. We'll call add, trick, and then return OK. All right, so super simple, nothing too complicated just yet. And the other two things to cover really are a put and delete. So kind of same story here, however we'll throw new not implemented exception, and we will do the same thing here. So this is update and this is delete. Okay, so HTTP delete, HTTP put, and usually you would have something like an int ID here for the delete part. Okay, so you don't usually have a delete for the whole list. For the delete, you put it on a specific route. For post and put, you don't really have an ID either. You don't have an ID when you create something, and you don't really need an ID when you update it. You can include it there if you want to, but that could be included as part of the model already, and you'll figure out in your logic here. But this is pretty much it. You can see that for the post and put and delete, these are kind of looking the same. Okay, so here we rely on the HTTP communication methods. All right, these are methods that you will find on Axios and stuff like that. All right, and again, there's going to be a link in the documentation about more information regarding how to actually structure APIs, but this is basically one object and a simple CRUD operation. So CRUD is create, read, update, delete, right? So read list, read specific, create, update, delete. All right. So we got this simple controller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the terminal and I'm going to use .NET Watch Run command. So any changes that I need to apply to my API, they will be reloaded automatically. And then for my web client, I'm just gonna go and say npm run dev, right? So I'm starting my Nuxt client and my API, and they're gonna be working together. Dropping that down, what I want to do is I want to go into the pages here. We'll open up the index page again and we'll just dissect what we've done here. And there are two ways that you can trigger server-side rendering. asyncData is your bog standard, just quickly give it to me, okay? When you're in a simple scenario, just give it to me. There is also what I've been mentioning in the first episode where we really want to push everything down into the store layer and do all the communications there. There is the fetch method, and I'll just go over it through examples in the documentation right now as well. But generally the idea is of why we're pushing everything down in the Vuex layer is if you imagine your application, right, like a structure of trees, so you have your indexes maybe, or like maybe even files, right? So imagine if you had HTTP calls in your component, if you had HTTP calls in your pages, and some in your stores, right? So now they're scattered all over your application. And this is usually how bugs occur, right? They're just like all over the place. So you want to bunch it all up, right? Like dust on your floor. You just sweep it. I mean, nobody sweeps anymore, but we vacuum clean it. So we want to vacuum clean our project, right? And we want to, and the vacuum cleaner in this case is the Vuex store, right? We vacuum clean it, and all the API calls go into our Vuex store. And now, if there is any problem with communications, we know exactly where to look. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at the documentation and see what it says about the async data and fetch functions, right? So for the async data, there's also one thing that I didn't mention previously, but again, this is something that we'll take a look at for. So yeah, sometimes you just want to fetch data, right? So this is that simple, just give it to me, and we don't have a Vuex store. It's a simple website, right? Just it's a simple scenario. Why do I need to involve a Vuex when I can just render it, right? The important part here is that it will be called server-side once, but once on the first request of the app, and client-side when navigating to further routes, right? So every time you sort of snap back on the page, so let's go ahead and actually see this. So I'll open the browser here, and let's do a console log asyncData called. Okay, so here we are in the app. I'm gonna open the console here. Let me turn off the preserve log. And yeah, I'll refresh, and here you can see this option for Nuxt SSR. So this is what's happening on the server side. And then if we go to the Inspire page and then we go back to the welcome bit, you can see the async data is called again, right? So there are ways to guard around it, and they have it in the documentation here. So you would do something like process.server. So if it's only happening on, if you need it to only happen on the server side, you can basically check, are you on the client or are you on the server? And you do process.server, and this is kind of like a global state variable. Okay, you can see that we're not getting processed anywhere in here, not through the function call. It's just kind of there for us to check, right? So that being said, we're not going to be using async data. We're going to be switching to what's it called, to the fetch method. Okay, so the fetch method is like the async data function, but it, instead of just appending the state, it will also try to re-render your application, and you actually have the access to your component. Okay, so kind of as a blog post I found here, again, everything's going to be in the description if you want to have a further read, kind of as a life cycle hooks of what is happening, right? So async data, same as if you've done Vue, you have the created or mounted lifecycle hooks. This is essentially just kind of jamming it in. So Nuxt server init, and really async data happens here. Then the component gets created, and then the fetch happens. So this is where we're going to be using this fetch function, but the fetch function basically works the same way. But what we can actually do is integrate it with the Vuex store as well. So again, in the documentation here, it explains it all. I don't want to basically go over these examples and copy paste and see how I'm adapting it. I'm just going to go through it, and then you can go look back to it and see the differences yourself and make up your own mind. But yeah, so the way I like to approach this is the data should not be in the pages. All right, pages should always read from the Vuex store. Components are okay with having local state. Okay, so data, the way I look about data is local state. All right, this is the stuff that doesn't really come from the API. So if we are filling out a form, that's local data that should be contained in a component. All right, pages should not have it. So let's take a look at how stores work. So in the documentation, what you'll find is you will have the top level store, which will be the index. So let's go ahead and create this first. We will have the index.js, and that's it. Basically, Nuxt will pick this file up in that folder, and it will say, okay, this is the root for my store. The things that I like to do is I like to create a function that I call initState. Okay, and make it a lambda like this that returns an object with whatever state we need in here. Okay, so for our case first, let's go ahead and replicate the same example that we have with the hello world bit. We have the initial state of the message. We will then export default, and not default, actually const state, and this will literally, we just assign the function without actually calling it, right? Because we kind of make it a factory here, so this kind of acts like a factory. So what we can do now is we will be creating the mutations, so the things that are going to be changing the state. Okay, and again, because this is not going to be the first time that we're going to build it up, we're going to run into building multiple stores for kind of one controller will have one store that will interface with it. So those are kind of like parallel bridges that will be between the app and the API. So we'll have mutations here, which is an object that contains mutations, right? And mutations are functions. So let's call one set message, and as a first parameter we'll have state, and then we will have the payload or whatever we're passing. In our case, we're going to be passing a message. We want to just go ahead, grab the message and assign the message to it. We then want an action. So in here we will have const actions, and again, kind of like Mutations actions is just an object which has functions around doing asynchronous data, okay? So mutations are synchronous, actions are asynchronous. So when you have to do your API calls, you do it inside your actions. When you need to actually write to your state, so mutations write to state, they're synchronous. Actions can do all kinds of stuff. They are asynchronous, okay? So let's go ahead and say async fetch message, and here you're gonna get a couple of things. So in your first parameter, you're gonna get context. So the context is gonna be your store, the context of your store, and what we really want to do is we want to decompile it and grab the commit function out of it, or not decompile it, sorry, deconstruct it, grab the commit function. And what the commit function allows us to do is to call or to invoke one of the mutation functions. So for us, it will be set message. I will copy the name. I will grab the message. And oh, one thing I didn't mention, we'll cover it later, but I guess it's not that important right now. Let's go ahead and make this const. There's a thing with modules and Nuxtjs, but I will leave it for now. Let's go ahead and grab Nuxtjs, and I will call get on it. I will await here because I did make this async, and let's go ahead into the index bit, or let me just put the name here that I copied. I'll grab this URL, I'll put it here, okay? So at the end, I will end up with the response, so I will just put the brackets around here, and you will see how we will be able to make this a little bit nicer. And then what we want to do is we want to grab this message and we want to commit it, right? So the way that you trigger a mutation, you basically just put the name of the mutation in the commit and then the payload that you're passing, okay? And writer actually gives you function navigation. So once you have like hundreds of these, you shouldn't have hundreds of these really in one place, but if I hover over set message and I press F12, so here you can see just navigating to declaration navigation, I can essentially see to which mutation I'm pointing to, right? So it's just like function declaration navigation C#, right? So when we call this function, we're gonna execute a fetch to our API. We're gonna grab our message and we're gonna commit it to the store here. Okay, so we're gonna execute a commit, and that's gonna put it on the state. So let's just say init here, right? So this is the initial state. And what I want to do is I just want to show you how I perform resets. So in the reset, again, we will pass state, and usually all my stores have this have this reset function. And here we'll just object assign, and we will do state, and we assign init state. So anytime we want to flush the state of the store, we just call reset. Okay. So if you watch my Vue tutorials, you should already know all this stuff, but then what we want to do is we want to grab a couple of functions, and this is how I essentially assign this functionality to the component. So we'll grab map state. So this is how we're going to be displaying the message, and then map actions. And we can also grab map mutations, and this will come from the Vuex library, right? So you're not going to get IntelliSense here, unfortunately. I'm not sure why, but can't have it all, right? What happens? Data, as I said before, it's local state. What we are going to do is we're going to be grabbing data from the Vuex store. So what we end up with is just using the computed variables, and here we just say map state, and we say what exactly do we want to map, right? So in our case, it will be message variable, right? And the message variable will basically, it's like a little lambda of selecting state from the Vuex store, right? So state is this state here, and it will have a message in it, and we'll just grab the message, and from that point on is just kind of same as having this message here, okay? And these will be our computed variables, and again, the message should be displaying here, right here. So for the async data, async data does not work with the Vuex store. You don't have access to this. You cannot grab the store. Okay, let's go ahead and use the fetch function. So async fetch, again, we could put async for the async data as well, but we won't. And here what we can do is just use it as a function, just like your create function, right? Because you will have access to this here. So let's go ahead and just do a simple store, okay? And here we will dispatch a action. So for mutations, you do commit. For actions, you do dispatch, okay? So we will dispatch fetch action, and that should be it. Let's go ahead and check this out. So here we are. Let's go ahead, flush this, give this a good refresh. And here we don't have anything, so there must have been a mistake. So let's go back to here. And yeah, a couple of things. So first of all, you need to wait on it. And next is you need the dollar in there. So that's how you access the store in just this regular context, right? So yeah, here we have hello world. So let's refresh this and make sure we go to the network. We go to localhost, and sure enough, we have the hello world pre-rendered. So one thing that you could do is let's go again, and here you have this navigation as well, so you can go to the fetch message from the index page. So let's go console, and we will log message, and just to sort of give you an idea of when this gets triggered as well. So again, let's clear this, give this a refresh. So on the Nuxt server side rendering, you can see the hello world. And again, same as before, if we go back and we go to the welcome page here, we get the hello world again. So it fetches it twice. So there is the server side render, and the fetch will happen every time you navigate to the page. Okay, so there's another thing that you could do, and that's Nuxt server init action. And it's pretty much sounds what it's it does what it sounds like, right? It's just an initialization on the server side. So this will run only on the server side. So let's go ahead and try this. Okay, so we will go here, instead of fetch message, we will do Nuxt server init, and from here we no longer need to do the initialization. Okay, let's go ahead and try this out as well. We'll refresh, we get the render, we get the hello world. Let's go to network, check the first render, hello world is here, and back to inspire, back to welcome, check the console, hello world's not there. So two things, use the fetch if you need to fetch that data every time you land on the page. Use Nuxt server init if you just need to fetch it once during the pre-render, okay? The decision behind using one or the other one will fall on what use case are we doing and whatever works best at the moment, okay? So now that we have this more or less, complete example, let's go ahead and also do the methods part for map mutations. Map actions will come later, but essentially in here we will just want an array. We will go to the index and we'll just say that we want the reset. Okay, so there is possibility of mapping these to different names, and there are things that you can do with mapping to the store, but for now the simple example is reset. Let's go ahead and create a button to reset this message. So you get IntelliSense here, so v-button, okay, close it, space, click, and we will just say reset. Okay, sure enough, F12, you get the navigation on here. On the reset, you get the navigation as well. All right, so you can navigate code reliably without searching your files, etc. Let's see this, didn't put anything in the button. Let's go ahead and put something in here. We'll call this reset. All right, there it is, reset, puts it back to init and preserves the reactivity. So we removed the fetch, never mind. So that's that. Let's go ahead and take a look at basically interacting with the Trix controller. All right, let's close most of this stuff. Now we can go ahead and create the Vuex store for interacting with our Trix endpoint. Let's go ahead into the store folder. We'll delete the readme, and for the store here, I don't know why it bumped me up there, but let's go ahead and create a JavaScript file. We'll call it Trix. Let's go back to the index, copy everything here, and go back here, right? So premise is pretty much the same. One thing is that this is going to be a module, a submodule of the stores, right? So it's going to be namespaced. If you watch my Vue tutorials, you're going to know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, go watch at least the Vuex parts. Yeah, pretty much the same thing. Let's go ahead and replace the message with Trix. Initially, it's going to be an array. We will want to be able to set a trick. We can just call it, let's just set Trix. So we have Trix here, and what I do with the payload, when I'm passing an object or an array of objects or whatever, I usually try to pass them in this payload, and I don't type payload or the object that I'm passing. I'm either passing nothing, or I will do it in this format, and that just allows me to add stuff without breaking previous functionality. Okay, so here we assign the Trix for reset. Reset stays the same. Nux server init, this is not going to be available here, so because it's a submodule, only the index will have the Nux server init available, right? So this is only going to get called in this index.js file. It's not going to work in this action, so we don't actually need this here. However, let's go ahead and say fetch Trix here. We're just going to start pointing to the Trix endpoint. We're going to grab our Trix. We can log our Trix, so let's say that we're logging them here, and we want to grab the set Trix function and pass the Trix in them like this again. I do it in this format because then if I want to, let's say if I just have the Trix object here and I suddenly change this here, right, it's gonna break if I basically add a number, this breaks. So Trix is no longer just the Trix number, no longer just the Trix collection. If I have this initially, nothing breaks. However, the new functionality doesn't work, right? So it's just gonna prevent some issues, and you have, you did one change, something else breaks. Instead of the new change not working, it's just gonna be a little bit easier to develop, right? So we're gonna fetch our Trix here. Let's go ahead, copy this, and here we're going to create a trick. And again, same with the payload here. We're just gonna have a trick that we're gonna be sending. Instead of get, we're gonna have a post here, and we are going to send the trick that we have here. We do not need the data, so we can just await on this like this, and we'll do a bit of a naive fetch. We're not gonna return any data and append it to the list. We're just gonna refresh the whole list. So we will need a dispatch command, and we will wait dispatch fetch Trix, and that's about it. Okay, so when we create a trick, we post it, we refresh our Trix, and this is something that we can call from within our index module. All right. So let's go into the index module here. We will add a dispatch command here. Let's go ahead dispatch, and we will dispatch Trix. Oh, feel like it was helping me there. Yep, fetch Trix. Okay, awesome. I didn't. This is the first time I see that actually. And here we can obviously await on this. Well, obviously, maybe it's not obvious, but we should await on this. So Trix. Yep, fetch Trix is asynchronous. That should work. Let's go ahead and move that up into our index view. A couple of things that I want to do is, let's go ahead and this card that we have here, and let's go ahead and delete it because I feel like there is a lot there. So I'll keep the message, and we will change the mappings with the state a little bit. So yeah, I guess it's worth noting how we're gonna use that module, that Vuex module. So we want the deconstruction of the map state. So here we will have the map state for the original essentially all the state properties are gonna get deconstructed into computed properties, and we can do the same, but for the Trix module, right? And here we'll have Trix and Trix again. Okay. Methods, same thing, except we're gonna be deconstructing functions. So let's make sure we deconstruct this. Okay, copy this again. One thing that we'll need to do is rename the reset or not use it. So instead of an array, what we would do is pass an object with aliases. So reset Trix, and we'll just say reset, and then we will say create trick, and that's actually an action, so we don't need to put it there. Let's go ahead and utilize the map actions. So again, it may look a little bit verbose right now, but that's because we're putting everything on one page. This will get a lot cleaner as we're going to be putting stuff where it actually belongs, okay? So in here, let's go into the Trix store. Let's grab the create Trix, and we'll just say this will be an array. Let's actually put this here and close this off. I will also need to supply a module name, so Trix, okay? And then again, you just get the same navigation as you do with these functions, right? So also, let's say save Trix. So this is the function that we will need to trigger. I'll call this async, and I will await on this create trick, where we're going to be passing a this.trick name. Okay, so comma here, let's not forget it, the trick name. Again, as I mentioned before, local state. This will exist on the component ideally. However, this is, for now, this is here, okay? So let's go ahead, display the tricks, capture the trick name, and create a trick, right? So first of all, let's make a div, v if tricks, and then p for each trick, t in tricks. We want to go ahead and display the name of the trick. Okay, nothing too hard. Let's go ahead and make another div. Here we will have a input. Okay, this can be a self-closing, or rather, let's keep it like let's have it like this. So v model, we want to supply the trick name, and let's give this a label of, we don't really need the colons. Colons, if I add a colon, it's a dynamic value. If I don't have a colon, it's a static value, okay? And we'll just say trick name, okay? And we can have reset here, reset message, reset tricks, and let's make another button where we will call save tricks, okay? Or rather save trick and save trick, and again you get the same good navigation here. So let's just make sure that the trick name that we're passing here is in good object format, and as you can see here, we're passing in an object of trick, so that's what I'm expecting to deconstruct. So here we have object that will contain a trick object with the name, okay? So this may look a little bit confusing, but trust me, once if in the future you want to pass an extra variable, it's gonna save you some headache for the reasons stated previously. So let's go back here, and we don't have the name. We still have the hello world. We can reset the message, etc. But one thing is, I think, yeah. So the input is a little bit confusing. It is a I do this mistake all the time, but or you used to do it. I just remember it now. You have it's basically like a top level component for your input fields. So stuff like the actual input field, the select boxes, everything inherits from it, sort of thing. So what we actually want to do is have a v text field, and let's go ahead and put all this stuff here and remove the v input, right? So v input, v text field, will inherit from the input, basically its layout and stuff like that. Okay, so let's go ahead. Oh, I didn't need to refresh that, but essentially here we have trick name. Let's go ahead and say test, save the trick, and there is our trick name. We can also do stuff like reset this. So let's say trick name, and we will reset this here, obviously, because our actual tricks are up on the ASP.NET Core in a singleton. Once the application shuts down, that's when this will actually disappear. So let's say 540, that's 540 kick. All right, so we don't have the edit option, but hopefully we have a good amount of tricks now. So let's go ahead and see. We refresh this. We have the tricks there. Here we can see on the server side, we get them in our logs. So if we go and take a look here, the initial server side rendering again works as well. And hopefully as we go on less and less, I will have to basically point to the server side rendering, and the flow of development will be more like fluent, and hopefully here you can see the gist of what you want to use. So now to basically to eliminate any confusion, if you still have it, let's go ahead, try to reset the tricks. Looks like it's still resetting the wrong thing right here on the map mutations. Yeah, so I didn't supply a module here, so let's go ahead and say this. All right, let's check this. Okay, so resetting the tricks that way, cool. So again, right, eliminating confusion. If we just step through the flow of what is actually happening, we have an API where we have a connection to a database or something like that, right? So the way that we communicate with that API is through the store. So it's like a one-way street, essentially, right? If we want to get to the API, to a specific API in that fact, right? We are no longer making the API requests from anywhere in our application. So essentially, if you think of communication with the API as a bridge, we don't want to have 1,000 little bridges all over our applications. What we have now is we have a store, and then we have the controller that it basically goes to, and there is one straight bridge. So if there is a fault in communication, you know what store to look at or which controller to look at. There is no other little parts here or there to basically look for, okay? It's basically in one place. But then if you have problems with interacting with the store itself, usually what you have is the store will then correlate only to one page. So again, you will have the store, the page, and then the page, this is where most of the complexity is, how the page propagates the information through the components, okay? And from there on, just about smartly arranging it, right? But again, so application starts up on the server. What is going to happen is we initialize Nux server init. This is going to fetch the message. It's also going to dispatch an action to fetch tricks, right? And we're going to be fetching tricks. We're loading the state, and then it's going to render the UI. On the server, is going to produce the HTML, and is going to send it to the browser. And that's where we get the first initial render. Now, in terms of these map mutations and map actions, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but again, this only looks messy, and you have multiples of these only because it's kind of, we're in this example scenario, all right? So usually, as I said before, you will have the Vuex store correlating to the page, and you want minimal scenarios where you have another page called a different store, right? Usually you will also have like central stores, like for example, let's say a pop-up, you want that to be anywhere on the page. And in that scenario, you will probably want it to correlate to a component rather, all right? So yeah, if you are confused about this syntax and you don't, it's called deconstruction, right? So go look it up. And the Vue documentation is pretty good around explaining this in Vuex, right? So how this works. And again, I explained in my Vuex video, so that should be more or less reasonable to understand. Another thing, again, I can't remember anymore if I mentioned it. Data, we want to avoid having data on pages. Data should exist on components where there is local state for stuff like forms, etc. But again, this is an example scenario. I don't want to drag this episode too long. longer than what it already is. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you're enjoying these series, leave a like, subscribe, make sure to ask questions in the comment section. I stream on Sundays and Wednesdays and other days. I announce it on my Discord channel, so links are in the description. So if you're interested in that, go join, and hopefully I'll see you in my other episodes.